Dean Uehara, thank you so much. That was really just a very powerful introduction. And to me, the description that you were offering of this ecosystem here, not just this beautiful room that's gathered here today, but the larger ecosystem of the School of Social Work and its friends, its family, its supporters, its students, its alumni, is pretty remarkable. And some of the things that you had to say and that Vonetta, you had to say as well, I think there's so many ways in which we who get to live and work in Seattle maybe become inured a bit to how darn lucky we are, right? That we take for granted on a regular Tuesday morning that you get a view out a window of a room like this, that you get to be in a place like this. And one of the ways I think we get to, or tend to take things for granted, is to overlook the incredibly valuable jewels and gems that we have in our own institutions here. The University of Washington itself, of course, but I think the School of Social Work, from a national and global perspective, is just one of those jewels. And, I don't need to tell you, you're here. But I do think that we all need to tell more people outside this room about just how powerful and transformative this institution is, particularly with your leadership, Eddie. Your spirit of open-heartedness and very kind of free dot connecting across domains and disciplines, between practice and action, all the ways in which you're describing, I think is, number one, it's inspiring, but number two, you can see how it's contagious. You can see in everybody you talk to who's involved with the School of Social Work, and I'm glad to have caught the bug from you as well. I really wanted to, I plan to speak this morning a bit about some of the ideas from my most recent book, The Gardens of Democracy, and I will in a moment, but just listening to these remarks from Vonetta and Dean Uehara made me think a little bit just about, well, among other things, about pragmatism and about this great tradition that we are all inheritors of if we care about social work, of John Dewey and Jane Addams and that whole generation of people who were pragmatic, not in the sense of I'll do whatever it takes or I hate ideas, but pragmatic only in the sense that the value of an idea is to be found in its actual application in the world. I studied law, not social work, and one of the great heroes of the law, another pragmatist, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, has a line that says, "The life of the law is not logic, it is experience." And I think the life of social work is not logic, it is experience. And experience demands a couple of things. It demands, in the first place, just awareness. It demands awakeness, right? That you be able to see and sense on every level what it is that you're going through and feeling, but also what it is that people around you are going through and feeling, right? So that it demands that level of kind of full sensory perceptiveness that, frankly, our times do not reward or cultivate so much anymore. But it also demands a kind of empathy that I think our times also don't demand so much anymore. Because this is, for a variety of reasons, technology and media maybe having a lot to do with it, this is an age of kind of remarkable narcissism. And not just among the much maligned millennials and teenagers who are always on their devices. It's all over our culture, our popular culture and our political culture. And this capacity for empathy, for truly not only being aware of your own experience, but imagining what another might experience, is foundational to this ability to perceive and to experience. And so I think one of the things that the School of Social Work does, the reason why it exists, is not only to train X number of graduates who go out into the world and whose support you are providing and helping by coming to a gathering like this and therefore helping to change the world, but also the purpose of a place like the School of Social Work is to remind everybody around it, other parts of this university, other parts of this city, and other parts of this country, what it means truly in a head and heart way to experience life. And to make it okay to talk about life in those terms. A bunch of years before I wrote The Gardens of Democracy with my friend Nick Hanauer, I wrote a book probably about almost a decade ago now called Guiding Lights, about great transformative, life-changing mentors and teachers from all different walks. all different domains. And I spent a couple of years traveling the country, interviewing hundreds of these remarkable people from, you name it, human services, the military, arts, sports, business, technology, education. And because they were so diverse and so disparate in their languages and their vocabulary of profession, I came to have to find a couple of universal questions that I could use as keys to unlock conversation no matter where I went. And the two questions I landed on were simply these: who's influenced you, and how do you pass it on? That was it. That was all I needed. With those two questions, I could go pretty much anywhere and open up with anybody a conversation not only about themselves, but about, again, their ecosystem, about the environment that had formed and shaped them, and about their perhaps suddenly rekindled awareness of their own responsibility to shape others in that environment. I invite you, and maybe some of you already are, even right now, just to think about who's influenced you and how do you pass it on, right? That is the work of social work, to be mindful always of the answers and the ever-changing answers to those two questions. I've spoken a lot already this morning about the idea of ecosystem, and this really brings me to the ideas that I had intended to share when I came up here and want to share with you now, that derive from both this book, The Gardens of Democracy, but also in the same spirit of trying to practice what I'm preaching here. I run a nonprofit called Citizen University that really has worked over the last few years to try to put into application some of the ideas that I've written about and some of the ideas that I've been describing about what it means to be and to practice being a powerful citizen. What it means on the level of values, what it means on the level of understanding of the systems that shape our community, and what it means just in terms of hard skills of moving people, living with people and moving them in a certain direction. And so the work both of the Gardens of Democracy and this organization, Citizen University, really boiled down to three ideas that I wanted to share with you briefly this morning, just as food for thought. And hopefully they will be, well, in a sense, seeds that will sprout in your minds and in your hearts even after we leave today. The title of this book, The Gardens of Democracy, itself has a little bit of an argument embedded in it. And let me unpack it for you. One of the things that I think we stop paying attention to in American life is the way in which so many aspects of our lives are seen and understood and perceived through a particular lens, through a metaphor of the machine. We think about economic life, the economy, as a big cogs and gears machine, and either, the job creation machine is cranking out jobs or it's not. We think about the economy or the recovery stalling. We use all this kind of mechanistic language. We think about politics and government and community in the same way, in machine terms, checks and balances and regulation, all this kind of machine brain talk. And while there's some usefulness to that language and to that metaphor, one of the most basic things that I believe is that to properly see each other, to properly see the world in which we're moving, we have to use the metaphor not of the machine, but of the garden. That the economy, our community, the School of Social Work, all these things are complex adaptive systems. They are ecosystems. They are just like gardens. And gardens don't tend themselves. Gardens require gardeners. They require people to seed and weed and feed and tend. And so the idea that a market, for instance, that our marketplace is a perpetual motion, perfectly efficient machine that should best be left to itself, and that the outcomes of the market are inherently moral and correct because they're efficient, is not only misguided, it's insane, right? And to understand instead that a marketplace is nothing more or less than a garden, and that gardens, when left to themselves entirely, well, they grow for a while. They grow like gangbusters, actually, for a while. But then noxious weeds take over. And those noxious weeds begin to choke off healthy growth. And pretty soon they've choked off the entire garden and it tips over and it dies. That's what happens when you apply a laissez-faire, mechanistic view to a living, dynamic ecosystem. And what is true of an economy is true of pretty much every domain of our lives. And from that simple premise, that metaphorical premise, there are these three ideas that I want to share. There are three really principles and precepts. The first one is simply this: true self-interest is mutual interest. Now again, for everybody in this room, you're a believer already. This won't sound kind of radical to you. But all I ask you to do is to step outside this room for a minute, even in Seattle, anywhere in this country. And the kind of dominant reflexive attitude that people have is that selfishness, true raw self-seeking, is good. Right? There's the Gordon Gekko formulation of it, which is greed is good, but it doesn't even have to be about monetary greed. There's a language in American civic life that glorifies and valorizes pure self-seeking selfishness on the notion somehow that magically, by the invisible hand of the market or otherwise, a million acts of selfishness will add up somehow to the common good. Right? Well, by that same line of thinking, there's two choices that you have. You either are purely self-seeking or you are a selfless altruist, a soft-hearted person who gives up on your self-interest. And I think, quite frankly, that people in the realm of social work, in this broad work of the helping professions, are often lumped into that category. Oh, you all are altruists. Hearts of gold, man. God bless you. You know? You don't care about yourselves. You just give and give and give, right? And there is a certain level on which that is true, of course. You do give. You do have hearts of gold. But I want to help reframe a way that we think about this work. That this work is not charity. This work is not some saintly kind of abnegation of your own interests. This work is self-interest properly understood. This work is recognizing that when I take care of my brother or sister in need, when I take care of those who don't have adults in their lives to take care of them, when I take care of those who have no children to take care of them, when I take care of those who do not have the wherewithal to even comprehend the idea of care or self-care, that I'm not just, quote, doing them a favor out of, quote, the goodness of my heart, that what I'm doing is helping myself in a longer-term, more ecosystemic way, that what I'm doing is making the entire body more healthy, and that I am of the body. I am not detached from the body. I am of the body. And so self-interest is truly mutual interest. And this is a thing that we've got to start convincing more of our fellow citizens to understand about the nature of social work. That you're doing this, yes, to be good to others, but you're doing this to be good to yourself too. To be good to your family, your community, the people you care about. And that the expectations on you shouldn't just be that you don't think of yourself, but that you think of yourselves in these other ways. So that's the first precept. True self-interest is mutual interest. The second one I want to share, which grows also out of this way of ecosystemic garden brain thinking, is simply this: society becomes how you behave. Now here again, this runs kind of against the grain of a lot of American thinking. A lot of American thinking basically says, you know what? I should be able to do whatever the heck I want as long as I'm not actively hurting somebody else, right? That is the ethic of don't tread on me. And everywhere you go in American life, I'm not talking just about conservatives or about party. This is across the ideological spectrum. This is across party lines, where there is an American ethic of raw, liberty-focused individualism. And to understand that society becomes how you behave is to recognize something else, is to recognize that you can't just carve off and cabin off your selfish greed or self-regard from everybody else. That when you choose to be, say, discourteous, that discourtesy is contagious. When you choose to be not compassionate. That lack of compassion is contagious. That when you choose to be uncivil in public conversation, that incivility is contagious. Because we are nodes in a network, because we are woven together, not only in this garden, but in a fabric of relationship and obligation in which our values, our norms, our attitudes, our actions, and our omissions are contagious. It's not like your good acts cancel out my bad acts. It's not like your good attitude cancels out my bad attitude. These things are rapidly, virally contagious. And when we understand that, a positive way to think about that is that every single one of us has the power to set off contagions of good. Every one of us has the power when you choose to be a bit more civil, when you choose to be intentionally courteous, when you choose to be compassionate. Every one of us has the power to set off contagions of norms, values, and behavior that didn't previously exist. There's a billboard that I once saw on this really congested highway. I don't think it was I-5, but it was a congested highway somewhere in Oregon, and traffic was completely at a standstill, and nobody was moving. And the billboard alongside this kind of gridlock said, "You're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic." We're not stuck in uncivil, broken, uncompassionate politics. We are these things. We're not stuck in a community that tolerates an unprecedented gap between the wealthiest and the poorest. We are that community. We're not stuck in an ethic of rampant commercialism that marketizes everything and devalues what really matters. We are that ethical system. There's no way to say that that's someone else's problem or that's someone else's fault. We own it, and we own the possibility of changing it. Which brings me to the third and the final precept that I wanted to share this morning that comes out of this garden brain view of the world. And that is simply this, that we're all better off when we're all better off. Right? And here again, in economic life in particular in America, we think that the dream, the American dream is to get mine, right? And if I get mine, well, the system must be working. And for people who didn't get theirs, well, my example of getting mine will motivate them, right? It'll inspire them to be makers and not takers. It'll prompt them to work a little harder, to grind a little bit more, and to make it just like I made it, right? That is, again, the American ethic in economic life, but I think more broadly in our notions and definitions of success, of what it means to live a successful life, to have opportunity, whether financial or otherwise. And the thing is, when you understand our society in these garden brain terms, and you understand the ways in which our fates are woven together, you understand the ways in which society becomes how you behave, and our interest is always mutually entwined, again, you cannot possibly imagine that your success is severable from the failure of 99%. You cannot imagine that your success is separate from the pain of others around you. And again, to flip it in the affirmative, you begin to imagine that when other people start doing better, economically, emotionally, psychologically, civically, you do better too. That their health is as contagious to you as their sickness once was. We're all better off and we're all better off. I happen to be involved right now in our city in this commission that the mayor has put together on studying a pathway to get us to a $15 minimum wage in Seattle. And there are many arguments about this and many trade-offs and many policy issues of implementation and the rest. But underneath all of the wonky stuff is a basic philosophical choice we have to make. It's a choice between, do we think that we ought to be a city where those who can make it and we celebrate them? Or are we a place where we're all better off when we're all better off? Where, again, the ability of people in the lowest economic strata in the lowest stations in our society, to the extent that they have more wherewithal, more purchasing power, more voice, more confidence, more presence, more claim on the public square, that's not just great for them, that's not just awesome for how they feel, but that's awesome for business. It's great for our economy. It's great for our civic life. It's great for the health of our community. It's great for our crime rate. It's great for our dependency rates. It's great for the need, the level of need that we have in this community. There's a very simple way to boil down pretty much everything I've said here, which, isn't so much pragmatist in the kind of tradition of the American pragmatists like Dewey and Adams, but it's a bit more, I guess, Asian, karmic, which is what goes around comes around, right? And the work of social work is tending these gardens of democracy. The work of social work is also reminding people all around us that we are in a garden, that we move in a garden, and that work, that responsibility belongs not only to those anointed with titles and status and powerful roles, it belongs to every single one of us as citizens. That to be a citizen is to take ownership. That to be a citizen is to say, this is my problem, not someone else's problem. That to be a citizen is to say, I think I have a right to do something about this. I think I have standing to say something about this. I think I might have the tools to do something about this. That's what it means to be a citizen. And by the way, I'm not talking about citizenship under the strictly legal notions of documentation status under the immigration laws of the United States. There are people in this room, perhaps, certainly on this campus and certainly in our city, who lack that documentation status and live like citizens far more than people whose families have been here for 10 generations. It's not about documentation status, it's about simply whether and how we show up for each other, how and whether we show up for community. And that ethic of being a gardener, showing up for one another, being mindful continuously of the ways in which our own experiences shape us and how our actions and omissions shape others, this is the work of social work, but it's also the work, quite simply, of being grown-ups. And when we think now not only about our lives, but about the lives of the students, young and older, because I know there's a great, beautiful age and life stage diversity among the students at the UW School of Social Work. When we think about the students who are, whatever their chronological age, young in their learning lives right now, young in their experiential lives, their abilities to connect practice and theory, to connect those dots. When we think about them, our responsibility as grown-ups, our responsibility as people who already show that we can show up pretty early in the morning for each other, for a gathering like this, our responsibility is to make sure that we invest in these students. And that when we invest in these students, when in a little while we get asked to fill out these pledge cards, that we do so not grudgingly but happily. And that we do so not thinking this is my act of charity, deductible on my tax forms, but that this is my act of investment, payable back to me in the health of my community. And when we do that, when we take that kind of ownership and act like grown-ups in that way, we will be setting an example that will make our students proud, make our dean proud, and make the entire university and community in Seattle here proud of the UW School of Social Work. Thank you very much.